The laughter started as whispers, then swelled into cruel waves that crashed through Snowpine Church. Margaret Turner stood frozen at the altar, her late husband's wedding dress hanging loose on her grief-worn frame. "Look at her pretending she's still a bride," someone sneered. The mockery drove her into the Montana cold, tears freezing on her cheeks. But from the shadows stepped a quiet rancher whose daughter would whisper three words that changed everything. "She is pretty. Daddy." Follow our story to the end and comment your city below. Let's see how far this tale travels. The December wind cut through Margaret Turner's threadbare coat like accusations, each gust carrying the echo of laughter from Snowpine Church. She stumbled through the snow, her husband's old wedding dress, the one she'd worn to honor his memory, on this the third anniversary of his death, now feeling like chains around her body. The white fabric yellowed with age and too large for her diminished frame dragged through the mud and slush of Main Street. "Did you see her face when Mrs. Henderson started laughing?" The voices carried from the church steps behind her. "Thought she could waltz in here like nothing happened." 3 years since Thomas died, and she's still playing the grieving widow. Playing more like scheming. Everyone knows she's looking for her next meal ticket. Margaret pressed her palm against her mouth, stifling a sob. She'd only wanted to honor Thomas to wear the dress one more time to the memorial service the church held every December for those lost in the mine collapse. She hadn't expected this. The dress had been her mother's, then hers on her wedding day 8 years ago. Thomas had loved it, said she looked like an angel descended from heaven. Now it hung on her like a shroud testament to the 100 pounds she'd lost since his death first. From grief, then from the harsh reality of trying to survive alone in a town that had turned its back on her. "Ma'am!" The deep voice startled her. She spun around, nearly losing her footing on the ice. A man stood 10 feet away, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a long duster coat and a weathered Stetson that shadowed his features. Beside him, a small girl of perhaps 6 years clutched his hand, her bright blue eyes wide with curiosity. "You dropped this." He held out a small leather journal, Thomas's journal, the one she carried everywhere. Margaret's hand flew to her coat pocket, finding it empty. Thank you." She reached for it, but her fingers were so numb she nearly dropped it again. The man stepped closer, and she could see his face now, weathered by sun and wind, with deep-set brown eyes that held no mockery, no judgment, just a quiet steadiness that made her want to weep all over again. "Papa," the little girl tugged on his coat. "Why is the pretty lady crying?" Margaret's breath caught. Pretty. When had anyone last called her that? "Emma," the man said gently. "That's not polite to ask." But Emma had already pulled free from her father's grasp and approached Margaret with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "Your dress is beautiful," she said, reaching out to touch the muddy hem. "Like a princess dress. Are you a princess?" "Emma." The man's voice carried a warning, but Margaret found herself kneeling in the snow, bringing herself to the child's eye level. "No, sweetheart. I'm not a princess, just someone who misses someone very much." Emma's face scrunched in thought. "Like how I miss Mama." The man cleared his throat. "Emma, we should let the lady, she's in heaven." Emma continued matter-of-fact in the way only children could be about death. "Papa says she watches over us. Does your someone watch over you?" Margaret's throat constricted. I hope so." "Then they saw your pretty dress," Emma declared with certainty, "and they're happy." The simple kindness of it broke something in Margaret. The tears came then hot and fast, and she didn't try to stop them. Emma, without hesitation, wrapped her small arms around Margaret's neck. "It's okay," the child whispered. "Papa says crying waters the soul, so new things can grow." "Emma, come here." The man's voice was gentle, but firm. As Emma reluctantly pulled away, he addressed Margaret. "I apologize for my daughter. She hasn't learned boundaries yet." "No, please." Margaret stood, wiping her cheeks. She's wonderful. You've raised her well." He studied her for a moment, and she became acutely aware of how she must look tear-stained, mud-covered, wearing a wedding dress 3 sizes too large in the middle of a December afternoon. "Luke Dyer," he said finally, touching the brim of his hat. "This is Emma. We have a ranch about 5 miles north of town. Margaret Turner. She didn't offer her hand, knowing how the town viewed her now. The Widow Turner they called her when they were being polite. When they weren't, well, she'd heard those words too. I know who you are. His tone was neutral, giving nothing away. Your husband worked the Copper King mine. Yes. She braced herself for what would come next, the accusations, the reminders of the rumors that had started even before Thomas's body was cold, that she'd been seeing another man, that she'd wished Thomas dead for his life insurance, that she'd spent the money on frivolities while pretending to grieve. All lies but lies that had taken root in the fertile soil of a small town's boredom. But Luke Dyer said only he was a good man. Helped me repair my barn once, wouldn't take payment. The unexpected kindness of the memory made her eyes well again. That was Thomas, always helping others. Are you hungry? Emma piped up suddenly. You look hungry. Papa made stew. Emma, Luke warned. But Papa, you always say we should feed hungry people, and she looks very hungry. Margaret wanted to die of embarrassment. She was hungry, starving, actually. She'd used her last coins for candles for the memorial service, thinking somehow that would make the townspeople remember. Thomas fondly remembered her as his devoted widow, rather than whatever they thought she was now. I'm fine, she lied. But thank you, Emma. That's very kind. Luke was studying her again, those dark eyes seeming to see right through her pretense. My ranch needs a cook and housekeeper, he said abruptly. The position comes with room and board plus wages. If you're interested. Margaret stared at him. What? Papa burns everything, Emma confided in a loud whisper. Even water. I do not burn water, Luke protested, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice. You made it all black that one time. The pot was... That's not the point. He turned back to Margaret. I'm serious about the offer. Emma needs a woman's influence, and I need help running the household. It's honest work for honest pay. Why? The word escaped before Margaret could stop it. You don't know me, and surely you've heard what they say. I've heard. His voice was flat. I've also seen you put flowers on your husband's grave every Sunday for 3 years, rain or shine. I've seen you give your last bread to the widow Martinez's children. I've seen you walking 10 miles to the Henley farm to tend their sick mother for no payment except eggs. He paused. I judge people by what I see, not what I hear. Margaret's hands trembled. I can't. The offer stands, Luke said. If you're interested, we'll be at Murphy's General Store tomorrow at noon picking up supplies. You can ride back with us then. He touched Emma's shoulder. Come on, little one. We need to get home before dark. Bye, pretty lady. Emma waved enthusiastically. I hope you come cook for us. Papa really does burn everything. As they walked away, Margaret heard Emma's voice carrying on the wind. Papa, why was everyone laughing at the pretty lady? Luke's response was too quiet to hear, but Emma's next words rang clear. That's mean. She was just being sad in a pretty way. Margaret stood in the street until they disappeared around the corner, clutching Thomas's journal to her chest. A job, room and board, wages. It seemed too good to be true, which in her experience meant it probably was. Men didn't offer charity without expecting something in return. But the little girl's face, open, honest, kind, kept flashing in her mind. Pretty lady. Such simple words, but they felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. She looked down at the wedding dress, now thoroughly ruined with mud and snow. Thomas would have laughed, she thought. He would have said she looked like she'd wrestled a pig and lost, and then he would have kissed her anyway, mud and all. The church bells rang 5 o'clock, and Margaret realized she'd been standing in the cold for nearly an hour. Her small room at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house would be freezing. Mrs. Patterson only provided heat until 4 o'clock, and Margaret was 2 weeks behind on rent anyway. Tomorrow, Mrs. Patterson would likely throw her out. Tomorrow at noon, Luke Dyer would be at Murphy's General Store. Margaret started walking not toward the boarding house, but toward the cemetery at the edge of town. She needed to talk to Thomas, even if Thomas couldn't answer back. The cemetery was empty, as it always was at this hour. Thomas's grave was in the back section where they buried the miners. A simple wooden cross marked the spot she couldn't afford stone. She knelt in the snow, not caring about the dress anymore. I met someone today, she whispered to the frozen ground. Well, two someones. A man and his daughter. He offered me work, Thomas, real work. The wind whistled through the bare trees, and she pulled her coat tighter. I'm scared, she admitted. What if it's a trap? What if he's like the others, expecting things, but his little girl, Thomas. She called me pretty. She hugged me. Her voice broke. I can't remember the last time anyone hugged me. A crow cawed overhead, and Margaret took it as a sign to continue. I'm so tired of being hungry, of being cold, of having everyone look at me like I'm something scraped off their shoe. Maybe this is a chance. Maybe you sent them to me. She stayed until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. As she stood to leave, she noticed something she'd never seen before, small purple flowers growing at the base of Thomas's cross. In December, in the snow. Impossible, but there they were. She picked one carefully, tucking it into the journal. Tomorrow, she decided. She would go tomorrow. The walk back to town was treacherous in the growing darkness. Ice had formed on the paths, and more than once she nearly fell. The boarding house loomed before her, 3 stories of peeling paint and broken dreams. She climbed the stairs to her room on the 3rd floor, each step creaking ominously. Rent, Mrs. Patterson's voice barked from behind her door. You're 2 weeks behind Margaret Turner. I know, Mrs. Patterson. I'll have it soon. Soon doesn't pay my bills. You have until tomorrow night or you're out. Margaret didn't respond. What was the point? She entered her small room, barely larger than a closet, with a narrow bed, a wooden chair, and a tiny window that didn't close properly. Ice had formed on the inside of the glass. She changed out of the ruined wedding dress, folding it carefully despite its condition. Her 2 other dresses hung on nails in the wall, both patched and repatched, both too large now. She chose the better one, a brown wool that Thomas had bought her for their 2nd anniversary. It would do for tomorrow, if she went tomorrow. She sat on the bed, opening Thomas's journal to read his familiar handwriting. He'd been teaching himself engineering, hoping to move up from common minor to shift supervisor. The pages were filled with diagrams and calculations interspersed with little notes to her. M made cornbread tonight. Heaven in a pan. M sang while hanging laundry. Mrs. Henley complained about the noise. I told her she was jealous of angels. M looks beautiful in the morning light. Every morning. Tell her more often. That last entry was dated 3 days before the mine collapse. Margaret pressed the journal to her chest and lay down fully clothed. It was too cold to undress further. Through the thin walls, she could hear Mr. Garrett coughing in the next room, the Thomas family arguing upstairs, a baby crying somewhere below. She thought about Luke Dyer's ranch. 5 miles from town, he'd said. It would be quiet there. Peaceful. Emma would probably chatter nonstop, but that was a different kind of noise, life noise, not desperation noise. But what would he expect in return? Men didn't give without taking. She'd learned that lesson the hard way when Mr. Simmons at the hotel had offered her work only to corner her in the linen closet on her 3rd day. When she'd fought him off and reported him, he told everyone she'd tried to seduce him. That was when the rumors really started. No, she couldn't risk it. Better to stay here to find something else to. A loud crash from downstairs made her jump. Shouting followed. Mr. Patterson had come home drunk again. Mrs. Patterson's shrill voice joined the chaos. Then the sound of breaking glass. Margaret pulled the thin pillow over her head, but it did little to muffle the noise. This was her life now. This room, these sounds, this hunger that gnawed at her constantly. Thomas would be so disappointed. No, Thomas would be heartbroken. She sat up suddenly. Thomas would want her to take the chance. He'd always been the optimist, the one who saw possibility where she saw problems. Life's too short to live scared, Maggie, he used to say. Sometimes you have to jump and trust the net will appear. Before she could change her mind, she got up and began packing her few possessions. 2 dresses, a hairbrush with half its bristles missing Thomas's journal, a photograph of their wedding day, and the small Bible her mother had given her. Everything fit into a single carpet bag. She wouldn't wait until tomorrow night for Mrs. Patterson to throw her out. She'd leave at dawn, wait at Murphy's store until noon. If Luke Dyer showed up, she'd take the job. If he didn't, well, she'd figure something else out. The night passed slowly. She dozed fitfully, starting awake every time the house creaked or someone coughed. Around 3 in the morning, snow began to fall, thick flakes that accumulated quickly on the broken windowsill. By the time pale light crept across the sky, several inches had fallen. Margaret dressed carefully, pinning her hair up as neatly as she could without a mirror. She wrapped her mother's shawl around her shoulders, moth-eaten, but still warm, and picked up her carpet bag. The house was quiet as she crept down the stairs. She left no note for Mrs. Patterson. What would be the point? The woman would curse her name regardless. Outside, the world had transformed. Snow covered everything, hiding the ugliness of the muddy streets and run-down buildings. For a moment, Margaret felt like she was in a fairy tale, one where magic was possible, and princes or ranchers really did rescue maidens in distress. Murphy's General Store didn't open until 8, but Margaret didn't mind waiting. She found a spot under the awning where the snow couldn't reach and settled in to wait. Her stomach rumbled, but she ignored it. She'd gotten good at ignoring hunger. People began stirring around 7. She recognized most of them in a town this small. Everyone knew everyone. Most ignored her, but a few shot her curious glances. What was the widow Turner doing at Murphy's so early, and with a bag, running away? Samuel Price's voice made her stiffen. He stood before her immaculate in his banker's suit despite the early hour. Or perhaps meeting someone. "Good morning, Mr. Price," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "You know, Margaret, my offer still stands. Housekeeping position, very generous wages." His tone was silky dangerous, much better than standing in the cold hoping for charity. She knew exactly what kind of housekeeping he had in mind. "No, thank you. Pride goeth before a fall, my dear, and you've already fallen quite far." He leaned closer, and she could smell his pomade cloying and sweet. "How much further can you afford to go?" The lady said no. Luke Dyer's voice came from behind Price, steady and firm. Margaret looked up to find him standing there, Emma beside him, both covered in snow. Price turned, his lip curling slightly. "Mr. Dyer, I didn't realize you were acquainted with Mrs. Turner." "She's my new housekeeper," Luke said simply. "We're here to collect her." Margaret's heart leaped. He'd come. He'd actually come. "I see." Price's eyes narrowed. "Well, I hope you know what you're getting into, Dyer. The widow has quite a reputation." "So do you," Luke replied evenly. "The difference is hers is mostly lies." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Price's face flushed red, but before he could respond, Emma tugged free from her father and ran to Margaret. "Pretty lady? You came?" "I told Papa you would. I said, Papa, the pretty lady looks sad, but also brave, and brave people always come. And I was right." Margaret couldn't help but smile, setting down her bag to accept Emma's enthusiastic hug. "Good morning, Emma. Are you going to make pancakes? Please say you'll make pancakes. Papa's pancakes are like rocks. Once I threw one for Dog and it knocked him over." "We don't have a dog," Luke said dryly. "Not anymore." The pancakes scared him away. Price made a disgusted sound and stalked off. Luke watched him go, then turned to Margaret. "Is that all you have?" He gestured to her single bag. "Yes." He picked it up without comment. "Murphy's not open yet, but we got here early to beat the storm. Bigger one coming this afternoon. We should head back now if you're ready." "I'm ready." They walked to his wagon, Emma chattering the entire way about everything from pancakes to her favorite doll to how she'd helped feed the chickens that morning. Luke lifted Emma up into the wagon bed, where she immediately burrowed under a pile of blankets. "Warm nest," she announced happily. Luke offered Margaret his hand to help her up to the bench seat. His grip was calloused but gentle, and he released her the moment she was settled. The ride began in silence, except for Emma's humming from the back. Margaret pulled her shawl tighter, aware of Luke beside her, aware of the huge step she was taking. "Thank you," she said finally, "for coming, for the job, for standing up to Mr. Price." "Samuel Price is a snake," Luke said bluntly. "Has been since we were boys. Don't let him bother you." "Easier said than done when he holds the mortgage on half the town." "He doesn't hold mine." There was satisfaction in Luke's voice. Paid it off last year. Drove him crazy. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of wheels and Emma's occasional observations about clouds that looked like rabbits or trees that looked like giants. "Can I ask you something?" Margaret ventured. "Go ahead." "Why did you really offer me this job? And please, don't say it's just because you need a housekeeper." Luke was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he said, "My wife died 2 years ago. Consumption. Emma was 4 old enough to remember her, but young enough that the memories are fading. She needs—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "She needs to see that women can survive loss and still be kind. Still be strong." Margaret's throat tightened. "I don't feel strong." "You stood in that church yesterday wearing your wedding dress to honor your husband, knowing exactly what those people would say. You didn't run when they laughed, not at first. You stood there and took it until you'd had enough. That's strength." "You were there?" "Back row. I don't usually attend, but Emma wanted to light a candle for her mother." "Oh." Margaret didn't know what to say to that. "Papa?" Emma's head popped up between them like a jack-in-the-box. "Tell her about the house. Tell her about her room. Emma, sit back down before you fall. Tell her about the books." "What books?" Margaret asked. Luke actually looked embarrassed. "My wife was a reader, collected books whenever she could. They're just sitting there gathering dust. Figured you might, that is, if you like to read." "I love to read," Margaret said softly. "Thomas used to joke that I'd rather read than eat." "Well, you'll have to eat at the ranch," Emma said seriously. "Papa says we can't have anyone fainting in the kitchen. It scares the chickens." The ranch came into view as they crested a hill, and Margaret's breath caught. It was modest but well-maintained, with a 2-story house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks white with snow. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's home," Luke said simply. As they pulled up to the house, a shaggy dog came running out, barking enthusiastically. "Dog!" Emma shrieked happily. "I thought the pancakes scared him away." "That's Bear," Luke explained. "And no, Emma, he's never been scared away. You made that up." Did 2 happen. "In my imagination." Luke shook his head but smiled. He helped Margaret down from the wagon, then grabbed her bag. "Come on, I'll show you your room." The house was warm and surprisingly neat, though Margaret could see the signs of a bachelor father's housekeeping dishes stacked rather than put away a layer of dust on the mantel, Emma's toys scattered across the parlor floor. Luke led her upstairs to a room at the end of the hall. It was simple but clean, with a brass bed, a wardrobe, a small desk, and Margaret gasped an entire wall of bookshelves filled with books. "This was Anna's room," Luke said quietly. "We had separate rooms because of her illness, didn't want her to keep me awake with her coughing. After she died, I just closed it up. Emma's right, though. It needs to be lived in again." Margaret ran her fingers along the book spines, reading titles, poetry novels, even some scientific journals. This is wonderful. There's a bathing room down the hall, kitchen's downstairs, of course. You're welcome anywhere in the house except my room. Emma will probably invade your space constantly. She doesn't understand privacy yet." "I don't mind." "Papa, can I show her my room?" Emma was bouncing on her toes in the doorway. "Let her settle in first, little one." "It's fine," Margaret said. "I'd love to see your room, Emma." Emma grabbed her hand and dragged her to a room across the hall. It was exactly what Margaret would expect from a 6-year-old girl, colorful drawings tacked to the walls, dolls arranged on the windowsill, a rocking horse in the corner. "This is Mr. Buttons," Emma said, holding up a well-loved rabbit doll. "He's my best friend." "Well, he was. Now you can be my best friend, too." "Emma," Luke warned. "Mrs. Turner is here to work, not be your playmate." "Can't she be both?" Emma asked innocently. Margaret knelt down to Emma's level. "I would be honored to be your friend, Emma. But your papa's right, I'm here to help take care of the house and cook meals. Speaking of which," she looked up at Luke, "what time do you usually eat? Breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. But today, whenever you're ready. I know you need time to settle in." Margaret stood suddenly all business. If you could show me the kitchen, I'll see what you have and make a list of what's needed. The kitchen was large and well-equipped, though, again showing signs of bachelor living. Margaret opened cupboards, checked the pantry, examined the stove. There was plenty to work with: flour, salt pork, preserved vegetables, even some canned peaches. "I can make lunch," she announced. "Nothing fancy today, maybe soup and biscuits?" "That sounds wonderful," Luke said. "I'll be in the barn if you need anything. Emma, you let Mrs. Turner work." "Can I help?" Emma asked Margaret. "I'm very good at stirring." Margaret smiled. "I would love your help." As Luke left, Margaret tied an apron around her waist. It must have been Anna's, she realized with a pang, and got to work. Emma proved to be an enthusiastic, if messy, assistant, chattering nonstop about everything from her favorite foods. Anything with sugar to her least favorite Brussels sprouts were apparently evil. "Mama used to make apple pie," Emma said suddenly, her voice going quiet. "I don't remember what it tasted like, but I remember it smelled like heaven." Margaret's hand stilled in the biscuit dough. "Would you like me to make apple pie sometime?" "Could you?" Emma's eyes went wide. "Really? If we can get apples, absolutely." Emma threw her flour-covered arms around Margaret's waist. "You're the best pretty lady ever." Margaret hugged her back, feeling something inside her chest crack open, not breaking but like ice beginning to thaw. They worked together for the next hour, Emma helping by adding too much salt, spilling water, and generally making 3 times as much work. But her laughter filled the kitchen, and Margaret found herself laughing too. Something she hadn't done in so long, she'd forgotten the sound of it. When Luke came in for lunch, he stopped in the doorway staring. Emma was covered head to toe in flour. Margaret's apron was splattered with soup, and the kitchen looked like a battlefield. But the table was set, steam rose from bowls of thick vegetable soup, and a plate of golden biscuits sat in the center. "Papa," Emma announced proudly, "we cooked, and nothing burned." Luke's lips twitched. "I see that, though it looks like you wore more flour than you used." "Flour is pretty," Emma declared, "like snow, but inside." They sat down to eat, and Margaret watched anxiously as Luke took his first bite of soup. His eyes closed briefly, and he let out a small sigh. "This is excellent," he said simply. "Thank you." It was just soup, nothing special, but the compliment warmed Margaret more than the fire in the stove. As they ate, she noticed Luke watching her, not in the way she'd grown accustomed to men watching her with calculation or desire, but with something like curiosity or concern. "You're not eating much," he observed. She'd taken only a small portion habit from months of stretching every morsel. "I'm fine." "Mrs. Turner." His voice was gentle but firm. "You're no good to me if you faint from hunger. Eat." She took another biscuit, buttering it carefully. The first bite nearly made her moan. Butter. Real butter. She'd been living on dry bread and thin porridge for so long she'd forgotten what actual food tasted like. After lunch, Luke returned to his work, and Margaret cleaned the kitchen while Emma napped. The afternoon passed peacefully. She explored the house more thoroughly, finding it solid and comfortable with good bones, as Thomas would have said. Around 4 o'clock, she started dinner, a simple roast with potatoes and carrots. The promised storm had arrived, wind howling around the corners of the house, snow falling thick and fast. Luke came in early, covered in snow. "Getting bad out there. Glad we got you when we did." As he shook off his coat, Margaret noticed him favoring his left arm. "Are you hurt?" "Old injury, axe up in the cold." He rolled his shoulder, wincing slightly. "Nothing serious." "Sit," she ordered, surprising herself with her commanding tone. "I'll get a hot compress." "That's not necessary, Shut." "Sit." He sat looking bemused. Margaret heated water and soaked a cloth, then pressed it to his shoulder. He tensed at first, then gradually relaxed. "Anna used to do this," he said quietly. Margaret's hand stilled. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to—" "No, it's nice to have someone care again." Emma bounded into the kitchen, then saving them from the awkward moment. "Is it dinner? I'm starving. I might die." "You're not going to die," Luke said dryly. "You had 3 biscuits at lunch." "That was hours ago. My stomach has forgotten." Dinner was lively with Emma, regaling them with a long, complicated story about a rabbit who wanted to be a horse. Margaret found herself relaxing, laughing at Emma's dramatics, even adding her own suggestions to the story. After dinner, Luke helped clear the table, something Thomas had never done, considering it women's work. "You don't have to do that," Margaret protested. "Many hands make light work," he replied. "Besides, you cooked. Least I can do is help clean." After dishes were done and Emma was bathed and put to bed, a process that took 3 stories and 5 glasses of water, Margaret found herself alone with Luke in the parlor. He was reading a newspaper while she darned one of Emma's stockings, a comfortable silence between them. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. He looked up. "Of course." "What really happened to your wife, if you don't mind talking about it?" Luke set down his paper. "Consumption, like I said. But it was a long illness. 2 years of watching her fade away bit by bit. The doctor said the clean mountain air would help. That's why we moved here from Denver. It did help for a while. But in the end," he shrugged, "in the end, nothing helped. I'm sorry." "So am I. She was a good woman, a good mother. Emma looks just like her." "She has your stubbornness, though," Margaret said, attempting levity. Luke's mouth quirked. "That she does." They lapsed back into silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Outside the storm raged, but inside the house was warm and safe. Margaret felt herself getting drowsy, the events of the day catching up with her. "You should go to bed," Luke said. "Tomorrow's a full day." She stood setting aside her darning. "Thank you, Mr. Dyer, for everything." "Luke," he corrected, "we'll be living under the same roof. Might as well use first names." "Then you should call me Margaret." "Margaret," he nodded. "Sleep well." In her room, and how strange to think of it, as her room, Margaret changed into her nightgown and sat on the bed. It was soft with clean sheets that smelled of lavender. The quiet was profound after months in the boarding house. She picked up one of the books from the shelf, a volume of Tennyson's poetry. Inside the front cover was written, "To my darling Anna, may you always find beauty in words. Love, Luke." Margaret traced the inscription with one finger. Luke had loved his wife, that was clear. The question was, what did he want from Margaret? Just a housekeeper and companion for Emma? Or was he like so many widowed men looking for a replacement wife? The thought should have frightened her. Strangely, it didn't. She blew out the candle and lay down, pulling the quilts up to her chin. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, she was sure. But for tonight, she was warm-fed and safe. For the first time in 3 years, Margaret Turner fell asleep without crying. The morning arrived with a peculiar stillness that follows a blizzard, the world muffled under 2 feet of fresh snow. Margaret woke before dawn, her body clock still set to boarding house hours, where early risers got the washroom first. She dressed quietly in the dark, her fingers fumbling with buttons made stiff by cold, then crept downstairs to start the fire in the kitchen stove. The house creaked around her, settling into the day, and she found comfort in these small domestic sounds after years of hostile silence. She had just gotten the fire going when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Luke appeared in the doorway, fully dressed, but looking surprised to find her already working. "You don't need to be up this early," he said, his voice rough with sleep. 6 o'clock is plenty early enough." "Old habits," Margaret replied, not mentioning that hunger had been her alarm clock for so long she'd forgotten how to sleep past dawn. "Besides, bread needs time to rise if we want it fresh for lunch." He watched her measure flour with practiced movements, noting how her hands no longer shook as they had yesterday. "You seem more at ease this morning." "It's easier to be at ease when you're not freezing, Sam," she said, then caught herself. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sound ungrateful for Margaret." He cut her off gently. "You don't need to apologize for speaking the truth. I know things have been hard for you." She focused on her mixing bowl, unsure how to respond to such straightforward kindness. Thomas had been kind, but in a different way, exuberant, demonstrative. Luke's kindness was quieter, steadier, like a river running deep rather than a waterfall's flash. "Papa," Emma's voice rang out from upstairs. "Papa, where are you? I had the dream again." Luke's expression shifted to concern. "I should go to her. She's been having nightmares since her mother died," Margaret finished softly. "Go." I'll have coffee ready when you come down." He gave her a grateful look and headed upstairs. Margaret could hear Emma's voice, high and distressed, then Luke's lower tones, soothing, patient. After a few minutes, she heard them coming down together, Emma's small hand in her father's large one. "Mrs. Margaret?" Emma ran to her, still in her nightgown, hair wild from sleep. "I dreamed about the dark birds again. They were trying to take me away, but then you were there with a big spoon and you hit them," she demonstrated with enthusiastic whacking motions. "Well, I certainly wouldn't let any birds take you," Margaret said, smoothing Emma's tangled hair, "dark birds or otherwise. Now, how about some warm milk while I make breakfast?" "With honey?" Emma asked hopefully. "A little honey," Luke agreed, settling her at the table. "Mrs. Margaret is going to think you're part bear with all the honey you want." "Bears are smart," Emma declared. "They sleep all winter." "I wish I could sleep all winter." "Then you'd miss Christmas," Margaret pointed out, warming milk on the stove. Emma's eyes went wide. "Oh no, I forgot about Christmas, Papa. How many days until Christmas?" 12 days, Luke said, accepting the coffee Margaret handed him with a nod of thanks. 12 whole days. That's forever. Emma slumped dramatically. "I might die of waiting." "You said the same thing about dinner last night," Luke reminded her. "Yet here you are, very much alive." As Margaret cooked breakfast eggs, bacon, and flapjacks that Emma declared were like clouds but better, she found herself studying the father and daughter. Luke was different with Emma than most fathers she'd known. He didn't dismiss her chatter or grow impatient with her questions. He listened, really listened, as she explained her complex theory about why snow was white, because all the colors got tired and decided to rest together. After breakfast, Luke prepared to head out to check on the cattle, warning it would take most of the day with the snow so deep. "The storm will have driven them to find shelter. I need to make sure they're not trapped somewhere." "Can I come?" Emma asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. "Not today, little one. Too dangerous with the snow this deep. You stay here and help Mrs. Margaret." Emma's lower lip pushed out in a pout that could have melted steel. "But, Papa—" "Emma," his voice carried gentle warning. "What did we discuss about arguing?" "That it's like trying to teach a rooster to sing," Emma recited with a sigh. "Waste of time and annoys the rooster." Margaret had to turn away to hide her smile. After Luke left, bundled in heavy coat and scarves, Emma attached herself to Margaret's side like a small chattering shadow. "What are we doing today? Can we make cookies? Can we read stories? Can I help with everything?" "We're doing laundry first," Margaret said, having noticed the pile of clothes in the mudroom. "And yes, you can help." Emma's enthusiasm for laundry lasted exactly 5 minutes before she declared it the most boring thing ever invented and wandered off to play with her dolls. Margaret didn't mind. The rhythmic work of washing was soothing, and she could hear Emma in the next room creating elaborate conversations between Mr. Buttons and her other toys. She was hanging clothes on the line strung across the kitchen, too cold to hang anything outside, when she heard horses approaching. Her body tensed immediately. Luke had taken his horse, but this sounded like multiple riders. A knock at the door made her freeze. Emma came running from the parlor. "Visitors? We never have visitors." "Emma, wait!" But the child had already unlatched the door. 3 men stood on the porch, their faces flushed with cold, and something else. Margaret recognized them: Jack Henley, Dave Morton, and Samuel Price. Her stomach dropped. "Well, well," Price said, his eyes finding Margaret immediately. "The widow Turner, already making herself at home." "Mrs. Margaret is our housekeeper," Emma announced proudly. "She makes clouds for breakfast." "Does she now?" Price's smile was unpleasant. "And where's your father, little girl chap?" "Checking cattle," Emma replied, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "He'll be gone all day because the snow is very deep and the cows are probably scared." The men exchanged looks that made Margaret's skin crawl. She stepped forward, placing herself slightly in front of Emma. "What can I help you with, gentlemen?" "Just checking on our neighbor," Henley said, though his eyes were taking inventory of the house behind her, "making sure everyone survived the storm." "As you can see, we're fine," Margaret said steadily. "I'll tell Mr. Dyer you stopped by." "You do that," Price said, stepping closer. And you might tell him that some of us in town are concerned about his judgment, taking in a woman of questionable reputation with a young child in the house. Margaret felt heat rise in her cheeks. My reputation is well known, Price cut her off. Your husband wasn't even cold before you were batting your eyes at every man in town looking for your next meal ticket. That's a lie, Margaret said quietly, aware of Emma behind her, listening to every word. Is it? Then why were you at the hotel so often? Why were you seen coming out of Mr. Simmons' office with your hair mussed and your dress askew? Because he attacked me. Margaret snapped her control, finally breaking. Because he cornered me and tried to... She stopped, remembering Emma. I was defending myself. Convenient story, Morton sneered. Dead husband, no money, suddenly everyone's attacking poor, innocent Margaret. You should leave, Margaret said, starting to close the door. Price's hand shot out, holding it open. We're not done talking. Yes, you are. The voice came from behind the men. They turned to find Luke sitting on his horse rifle across his saddle. Margaret hadn't even heard him approach. Luke, Price said, his tone shifting to false friendliness. We were just checking on you after the storm. No, you were harassing my housekeeper and frightening my daughter. Luke dismounted the rifle, still casual but present in his hands. Get off my property. Now, Luke, no need for hostility, Henley said, nervously eyeing the rifle. We're just concerned citizens. You're gossips and bullies, Luke said flatly. And you're trespassing. Leave. Now. Price's face flushed dark red. You're making a mistake, Dyer. That woman is poison. She'll destroy everything she touches, just like she did her husband. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Emma seemed to sense the danger in it, pressing closer to Margaret's skirts. Luke took a step forward, and something in his movement made all three men step back. Thomas Turner died in a mine collapse along with 12 other men, Luke said, his voice deadly quiet. Are you suggesting his widow somehow caused that? That she somehow weakened the support beams from her kitchen, that she controlled the cave-in that killed 13 men? That's not what Price started. Or maybe, Luke continued, moving closer, you're just a cruel small man who takes pleasure in tormenting a grieving widow because she refused your disgusting advances. Price's face went from red to purple. How dare you? Everyone knows what you are, Price, Luke said. How many women in town have you cornered? How many have you threatened with foreclosure if they didn't warm your bed? Margaret had the courage to tell you no, and you've been punishing her for it ever since. You can't prove anything, Price snarled. I don't need to. This is my land, my home, and Margaret Turner is under my protection. If any of you come here again without legitimate business, if you harass her in town, if you so much as look at her wrong, you'll answer to me. He paused. And I'm not nearly as civilized as Thomas was. The threat hung in the air like ice crystals. Finally, Price turned on his heel. Come on, he told the others. Let's leave Dyer to his poor choices. They mounted their horses and rode off, but not before Price shot one last venomous look at Margaret. She knew this wasn't over. Men like Samuel Price didn't forgive humiliation. Luke watched them until they were out of sight, then turned to Margaret and Emma. His daughter was crying silently, confused and frightened. Emma, sweetheart, he said gently, kneeling down to her level. I'm sorry you had to hear that. Those were bad men saying mean things. Why were they mean to Mrs. Margaret? Emma asked, her voice small. She's nice. She makes good breakfast. Luke gathered her into his arms. Sometimes people are mean because they're angry about other things. It's not fair and it's not right. Will they come back? No, Luke said firmly. They won't come back. Emma pulled back to look at him. You promise? I promise. She turned to Margaret, then wrapping her small arms around Margaret's waist. Don't be sad. Papa won't let them hurt you. He's very strong. Once he lifted a whole cow. It was a calf, Luke corrected, standing, and it was stuck in mud. Still counts, Emma insisted. She looked up at Margaret. Are you okay? Margaret was far from okay. She was shaking partly from anger, partly from fear, partly from the shock of being defended so fiercely, but she managed a smile for Emma. I'm fine, sweetheart. How about we make those cookies now? Emma's face lit up. Really? Even after the mean men? Especially after the mean men. Cookies make everything better. As Emma ran to get her apron, Luke caught Margaret's arm gently. Are you really all right? She took a shaky breath. Why did you come back? Forgot my extra gloves. Lucky I did. He studied her face. What Price said about Simmons. It's true, she said quietly. He cornered me in the linen closet. I fought him off, but when I reported it, he told everyone I'd tried to seduce him. That's when the rumors really started. Price saw an opportunity and started pursuing me too, offering help with strings attached. When I refused, she shrugged. You saw. Luke's jaw tightened. I should have shot him. That wouldn't help anything. It would help me feel better, he muttered, then seemed to catch himself. I'm sorry, you don't need my anger on top of everything else. Your anger isn't at me, Margaret said softly. That makes all the difference. They stood there for a moment, caught in something neither quite understood until Emma's voice broke the spell. Mrs. Margaret, I can't find the sugar and we can't make cookies without sugar because then they'd just be sadness circles. Margaret laughed. Actually laughed, and went to help Emma find the sugar. Luke watched them go, something shifting in his chest. He'd hired Margaret as a housekeeper, but seeing her with Emma, seeing her stand up to Price, despite her fear, seeing her laugh, even after being attacked, she was becoming something more. Something he wasn't ready to name. The afternoon passed peacefully. Margaret and Emma made sugar cookies, though more flour ended up on Emma than in the bowl. The child's laughter filled the kitchen, and Margaret found herself relaxing despite the morning's confrontation. This was what she'd missed, not just safety and food, but purpose. Being needed. Being valued for more than her body or her desperation. Mrs. Margaret, Emma said carefully, pressing a cookie cutter into dough. Why don't you have any children? The question caught Margaret off guard. My husband and I weren't blessed with children. Oh. Emma considered this. Well, you can share me if you want. Papa says I'm more than enough child for anyone. Margaret's eyes burned with sudden tears. That's very generous of you, Emma. I'm good at sharing. Well, except for my dessert. I'm not good at sharing dessert. Nobody's good at sharing dessert, Margaret agreed solemnly. That's asking too much of anyone. When Luke came in for dinner, he found them decorating cookies with precious sugar icing, Emma's face covered in more frosting than the cookies. Papa, look, I made you a horse cookie. See, it has legs and everything. Luke examined the blob of dough that looked nothing like a horse. It's perfect, little one. And Mrs. Margaret made you a star because she says you're the sheriff of our house. I didn't say sheriff, Margaret protested, blushing. I said protector. Luke's eyes met hers over Emma's head. I can be both. Dinner was quiet, the events of the morning casting a shadow despite Emma's chatter. After the child was in bed, Margaret found Luke in his study going over account books. I should leave, she said without preamble. He looked up sharply. What? Price won't let this go. He'll make trouble for you for your ranch. I can't be the cause of Margaret, sit down. She remained standing. You don't understand. He holds mortgages. He has influence. I said, sit. His voice was firm but not unkind. She sat. Luke leaned back in his chair, studying her. Do you know why I really came back today? You said you forgot your gloves. I lied. He pulled a pair of gloves from his desk drawer. These were here the whole time. I came back because I had a bad feeling. Call it intuition or providence, but something told me to come back. Margaret stared at the gloves. Oh. I meant what I said. You're under my protection. Not because you're weak or helpless, you're neither, but because it's right. Because Thomas would want someone looking out for you. Because Emma needs you. He paused. Because I need you. The words hung between them, meaning more than perhaps he'd intended. I'm not... Margaret started, then stopped. I'm not looking for another husband. I'm not looking for another wife, Luke replied. But I am looking for help raising Emma. She's already more attached to you than she's been to anyone since Anna. That means something. What happens when she gets too attached? Margaret asked. What happens if I have to leave? Why would you have to leave? Because that's what happens to women like me. We get comfortable. We start to hope. and then something happens and we're back on the street. Luke was quiet for a moment. You're not women like you. You're Margaret Turner, and as long as you want to stay, you have a home here. The simplicity of it broke something in her. She'd been prepared for conditions, for expectations, for the inevitable moment when he'd want more than she could give. But this unconditional acceptance she had no defense against. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Do what or be safe, be valued. I keep waiting for the catch. There's no catch, Luke said. Just work and wages and a little girl who thinks you hung the moon. And you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. What do you think? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he said, I think Thomas Turner was a lucky man, and I think anyone who can't see your worth is a fool. Heat flooded her cheeks. Luke, I'm not making advances, he said quickly. I'm stating facts. You're a good woman, Margaret. You deserve better than what this town has given you. She stood abruptly overwhelmed. I should go to bed. Early morning tomorrow. Margaret. His voice stopped her at the door. You're safe here. I need you to believe that. She looked back at him, this quiet man who'd appeared like something out of a fairy tale offering rescue without asking for payment. I'm trying to. That night she lay awake thinking about the day, about Price's threats and Luke's protection, about Emma's easy affection and Luke's complicated kindness. She thought about Thomas, too, wondering what he would make of all this. Would he approve? Would he want her to stay? As if in answer, wind rattled the window and she remembered the purple flowers growing at his grave in the snow. Impossible flowers. Like an impossible job offer from an impossible man. Maybe she thought impossible was exactly what she needed. The next few days passed in relative peace. Margaret fell into a routine cooking, cleaning, mending, teaching Emma her letters in the afternoon. The child was quick and eager to learn, though she insisted on creating elaborate stories for each letter instead of simply memorizing them. A is for angry alligator, she announced one afternoon. He's angry because someone stole his apples. Alligators don't eat apples, Margaret pointed out. This one does. He's special. Luke often joined them for these lessons, pretending to read his newspaper while actually listening to Emma's stories. Margaret caught him smiling more than once at his daughter's imagination. On the fourth day, they ran low on supplies. Luke announced he'd need to go to town. Can we come? Emma asked eagerly. Please, Papa, I want to show everyone Mrs. Margaret. Luke and Margaret exchanged glances. They both knew what waited in town stares, whispers, judgment. I don't think, Margaret started. Yes, Luke said firmly. You're both coming. We need supplies, and Margaret needs to be seen as part of this household. Margaret wanted to protest, but something in his expression stopped her. He was right. Hiding would only make the gossip worse. The ride to town was tense despite Emma's constant chatter. Margaret wore her best dress, which wasn't saying much, and had pinned her hair carefully. She looked respectable, she told herself. Proper. But the moment they entered town, the whispers started. People stopped on the sidewalks to stare. Women pulled their children closer. Men leered or frowned, or both. Why is everyone looking at us? Emma asked, her voice carrying in the cold air. Because we're interesting, Luke said calmly. Ignore them. At Murphy's General Store, Mrs. Murphy's welcome smile froze when she saw Margaret. Mr. Dyer, I heard you'd hired someone. Mrs. Turner is our housekeeper, Luke said evenly. We need supplies. As they shopped, Margaret felt eyes on her constantly. Women she'd known for years turned away. Men who'd propositioned her after Thomas's death now looked at her with disgust, as if her refusal of them was somehow more offensive than their offers had been. Emma, oblivious to the tension, pulled Margaret around the store, exclaiming over everything. Look, Mrs. Margaret Peppermint sticks and ribbons. Oh, can we get ribbons? Your hair would look so pretty with ribbons. Ribbons are frivolous, Margaret said quietly, aware of Mrs. Murphy listening. Nothing's frivolous if it makes someone happy, Luke said, adding a packet of ribbons to their purchases. Choose a color, Emma. Blue, Emma declared, like Mrs. Margaret's eyes. At the counter, Mrs. Murphy tallied their purchases with pursed lips. That'll be $12.40. Luke paid without comment, but Margaret saw Mrs. Murphy's expression disappointment that she couldn't refuse their business. They were loading the wagon when Reverend Mills approached. Margaret tensed, remembering his silence when she'd been laughed out of his church. "Mr. Dyer," the Reverend said, then nodded stiffly to Margaret. "Mrs. Turner." "Reverend," Luke replied coolly. "I wanted to say—" The Reverend shifted uncomfortably. "What happened at the memorial service was unchristian. I should have stopped it." "Yes," Luke agreed. "You should have." The Reverend flushed. "I'm trying to apologize." "Then apologize to Mrs. Turner, not to me." Reverend Mills turned to Margaret, clearly uncomfortable. "I apologize for not intervening, Mrs. Turner. It was wrong of me." Margaret didn't know what to say. The apology felt hollow, coming only after Luke's protection made her valuable again. "Thank you," she managed. Emma, who'd been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "You should apologize better. Papa says a real apology means you won't do it again. Will you let people be mean in church again?" The Reverend looked even more uncomfortable. "No, child. I won't. Promise?" "Emma," Luke warned. "It's a fair question," the Reverend said with a sigh. "I promise, young lady." Emma nodded, satisfied. "Good. Church shouldn't be mean. It should be nice, like Mrs. Margaret." As they drove home, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in years: vindication. Small, perhaps, but real. The Reverend had apologized. Luke had stood by her publicly. Emma had defended her with the fierce loyalty of childhood. "Thank you," she said quietly to Luke. "For what? For making me come. For the ribbons. For everything." "You don't need to thank me for treating you with basic decency, Margaret. In my experience, basic decency is rarer than gold." Luke glanced at her, something soft in his expression. "Then you've been around the wrong people." That evening, as Margaret braided Emma's hair with a new blue ribbon, the child said something that stopped her cold. "Mrs. Margaret, are you going to be my new mama?" Margaret's hand stilled. "Emma, I'm your housekeeper. But you do mama things. You make breakfast and fix my hair and read me stories and hug me when I'm sad." "Those are things housekeepers do too," Margaret said carefully. Emma turned to look at her with those startling blue eyes. "But do you love me?" The question hung in the air like a held breath. Margaret could lie, could maintain the professional distance that would protect them both. But looking into Emma's earnest face, she couldn't. "Yes," she whispered. "I love you very much." Emma smiled brilliantly and threw her arms around Margaret's neck. "I love you too. So you have to be my mama. That's the rule." "Emma, it's not that simple." "Why not?" Emma pulled back, frowning. "You love me. I love you. Papa likes you." "Emma." Luke's voice from the doorway made them both jump. How long had he been standing there? Time for bed. Emma looked between them, her child's intuition sensing the sudden tension. "But Papa, bed," he repeated gently but firmly. After Emma was tucked in, Margaret found Luke on the porch, despite the cold, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have—" "You love her?" he asked without turning. Yes. I know I shouldn't. I know my place, but—" "Good." He turned to face her then. "She needs love. She needs someone who cares about her for more than wages. I would never hurt her, Luke. If you want me to keep more distance—" "No." The word was sharp, definitive. "Don't you dare pull away from her now. She's lost enough." They stood in silence, the weight of unspoken things between them. Finally, Luke said, "She's right, you know, about you doing mama things. I'm just doing my job." "No," he said softly. "You're doing much more than that, and we both know it." Before she could respond, he went inside, leaving her alone with the stars and her racing thoughts. Everything was getting complicated. Lines were blurring. The safe, simple arrangement she'd thought she was accepting was becoming something else entirely. And the most terrifying part, she didn't want to stop it. That night she heard Emma crying out in her sleep again. Without thinking, Margaret went to her, gathering the child in her arms. "Shh, sweetheart, it's just a dream." "The dark birds," Emma whimpered. "They said you were leaving." "I'm not leaving," Margaret said, and realized she meant it. "I'm right here." "Promise." Margaret hesitated. Promises were dangerous things, but holding this child who'd somehow claimed her heart, she couldn't help herself. "I promise." Emma settled against her, and Margaret began to sing softly, an old lullaby her mother had sung, one she hadn't voiced in years. From the hallway she sensed Luke watching, but he didn't interrupt. She sang until Emma's breathing deepened, until the child was fully asleep. When she finally looked up, Luke was gone, but something had shifted in the house. A decision had been made, perhaps by all of them, though none had spoken it aloud. This was becoming more than a job, more than an arrangement. This was becoming a family. And that terrified Margaret more than all of Samuel Price's threats combined. The promise Margaret made to Emma that night haunted her through the following days. Every time the child smiled at her, every time she called out, "Mrs. Margaret," with such joy the weight of that promise pressed heavier on her chest. She had promised not to leave, but life had taught her that promises were luxury items poor women couldn't afford. A week before Christmas, Luke announced he needed to drive cattle to the stockyards in Billings. "It's a 3-day journey there and back," he explained over breakfast. "I hate to leave you both, especially with the weather uncertain, but these cattle won't sell themselves." "We'll be fine," Margaret assured him, though the thought of being alone at the ranch made her nervous. What if Price came back? What if something happened to Emma? Luke seemed to read her thoughts. "Tom Harrison from the neighboring ranch will check on you daily. His son Will can help with any heavy work." "Will Harrison?" Emma perked up. "He pulled my braids at church." "That means he likes you," Luke said, then caught himself. "But don't let him do it again. Boys need to learn respect early." The morning Luke left, the temperature had dropped significantly. He stood at the door, clearly reluctant to go, giving last-minute instructions that Margaret had already heard 3 times. "The rifle is above the mantel. You know how to use it?" "Thomas taught me," she confirmed. "Good. There's extra firewood in the barn. Don't let Emma go out alone if it storms. The well pump might freeze if it does. There's an axe in the tool shed to break the ice. And, Luke," Margaret placed a hand on his arm, stopping his nervous recitation. "We'll be fine." He looked down at her hand, and she quickly withdrew it, heat flooding her cheeks. But he caught her fingers before she could pull away completely. "I know you can manage," he said quietly. I worry. About Emma. About both of you." The admission hung between them, too honest for the early morning light. Emma broke the moment by barreling into her father's legs. "Papa, bring me something from Billings, something special." "What kind of special?" he asked, lifting her up. "Surprise special, the best kind." He kissed her forehead, set her down, and looked once more at Margaret. "Take care of each other." "We will," Margaret promised, and watched him ride away until he disappeared over the hill. The first day passed peacefully. Margaret and Emma baked bread, did laundry, and worked on letters. Tom Harrison stopped by as promised, a weathered man in his 60s who tipped his hat politely to Margaret. "Ma'am, Luke asked me to check if you needed anything." "We're fine, Mr. Harrison, thank you." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Storm coming tonight. You got enough wood inside?" "Yes," Luke made sure before he left. "Good man, Luke. Shame about his Anna, but..." He stopped, seeming to realize the awkwardness. "Well, I'll be by tomorrow." That night the storm hit with a vengeance. Wind howled around the house like a living thing, rattling windows and sending drafts through every tiny crack. Emma crawled into Margaret's bed around midnight, shaking. "The house is angry," she whispered. "No, sweetheart. It's just wind. The house is strong. Your papa built it well." "Tell me a story," Emma pleaded. "About something not scary." Margaret pulled the child close and began weaving a tale about a brave princess who lived in a castle made of flowers. But even as she spoke, she listened to the storm's fury, wondering if the house really was as strong as she'd claimed. By morning, snow had drifted against the doors, and the temperature inside had dropped dramatically despite the fire she'd kept burning all night. When she tried to pump water for breakfast, nothing came. "Frozen," she muttered, remembering Luke's warning. "What's frozen?" Emma asked, wrapped in a blanket like a small burrito. "The pump. I need to go break the ice." "Can I come?" "No, stay inside where it's warm. Watch through the window." Margaret bundled up and fought her way to the tool shed through knee-deep snow. The axe was where Luke had said, but it was heavier than she'd expected. She struggled back to the pump, raised the axe, and brought it down hard. The impact jarred her entire body, but the ice cracked. Several more swings and water began flowing. She was triumphant until she turned to go back inside and found Samuel Price standing between her and the house. My, he said, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The widow Turner playing pioneer woman. Margaret gripped the axe tighter. "Get off this property." "Now, is that any way to greet a concerned neighbor? I heard Luke was gone. Thought you might need assistance." "I don't need anything from you." Price stepped closer and Margaret could smell whiskey on him despite the early hour. "You're shivering. Why don't we go inside, warm up by the fire? I'm sure the little girl won't mind." The mention of Emma sent ice through Margaret's veins, colder than any winter storm. "If you take one step toward that house, I'll bury this axe in your skull." Price laughed, but there was uncertainty in it. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." Margaret raised the axe, her arms shaking from cold and fear, but her resolve steady. "I've lost everything once. I won't lose it again." "You're making a mistake," Price snarled. "When Dyer gets tired of you, and you'll come crawling to me, and my price will be much higher." "I'd rather starve." "You nearly did remember how quickly you forget who offered you salvation." "You offered me degradation disguised as salvation. There's a difference." The door to the house flew open, and Emma appeared, Luke's rifle in her small hands dragging on the ground. "You leave Mrs. Margaret alone," she shouted, trying to lift the heavy weapon. "Emma, no!" Margaret started toward her, but Price moved too, and she had to keep the axe between them. "A child with a gun?" Price mocked. "How charming." The sound of horses made them all turn. Tom Harrison and his son Will rode up fast, both armed. "Problem here?" Harrison asked, his rifle already pointed at Price. "Mr. Price was just leaving," Margaret said steadily. Price looked between the Harrisons and Margaret, calculating. Finally, he backed toward his horse. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Harrison said flatly. "Luke Dyer is a friend. His household is under my protection while he's gone. You come here again, Price, and they'll find your body come spring thaw." Price mounted his horse with as much dignity as he could muster. As he rode away, he called back, "Ask her about the hotel, Harrison. Ask her what she did for money." Harrison spat in the snow. "Sam Price is a lying snake. You all right, ma'am?" Margaret nodded, though she was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Emma put the rifle down carefully. Emma set it in the snow and ran to Margaret, wrapping her arms around her waist. "I was so scared. But I remembered Papa said to protect you." "Oh, sweetheart." Margaret dropped the axe and held Emma tight. "You were very brave, but promise me you'll never pick up a gun again without an adult." "I promise. Was that a bad man?" "Yes," Margaret said simply. "A very bad man." Harrison dismounted and picked up the rifle. "We'll help Mrs. Turner with firewood. I'll stay here a spell, make sure Price doesn't circle back." Young Will Harrison, all of 16 and blushing furiously, helped Margaret carry wood inside while his father stood guard. Emma followed Will around, peppering him with questions. "Why did you pull my braids?" I don't know," Will mumbled. "Papa says boys who pull braids are silly. Are you silly?" "I guess so." "That's okay. I'm silly too sometimes." Despite everything, Margaret found herself smiling at the boys' discomfort and Emma's relentless interrogation. After the Harrisons left with promises to return twice daily until Luke returned, Margaret barred the door and built up the fire. Emma was unusually quiet, curled against Margaret's side on the sofa. "Mrs. Margaret, why did that man want to hurt you?" How did you explain human cruelty to a 6-year-old? Sometimes people want things they can't have, and it makes them mean. What did he want? Margaret chose her words carefully. He wanted me to work for him, but not in a nice way like your papa. He wanted to be cruel. Papa would never let him hurt you, Emma said with complete confidence. No, he wouldn't. And neither would I. I'd hit him with a spoon, a really big spoon. Margaret hugged her closer. My fierce little protector. They spent the rest of the day inside playing games and reading stories, but Margaret kept the rifle within reach and started at every sound. That night she barely slept, jerking awake at every creak and whistle of wind. The second morning brought Tom Harrison as promised, along with unexpected visitors, 3 women from town in a small sleigh. Margaret recognized Mrs. Foster, the baker's wife, Mrs. Chen, who ran the laundry, and surprisingly Mrs. Henderson, who had laughed the loudest at the church. "May we come in?" Mrs. Foster asked, her tone neutral. Margaret wanted to refuse, but curiosity won. Of course. The women entered looking around with obvious interest. Emma Never Shy announced, "We had a bad man yesterday, but I got the gun and Mr. Harrison scared him away." The women exchanged glances. "We heard," Mrs. Chen said. "Sam Price has been telling everyone you threatened him with an axe." "He was trespassing," Margaret said defensively. "We know." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. "That's why we're here. I owe you an apology, Mrs. Turner." Margaret blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry. I laughed at you in church. It was cruel and unchristian." Mrs. Henderson's voice was stiff, as if the words were being pulled from her. "My husband, he told me some things about Sam Price, things he's done to other women. I didn't realize." "Price tried to force himself on my niece last summer," Mrs. Foster said quietly. "We couldn't prove it, but we know it was true." "He holds my husband's laundry business loan," Mrs. Chen added. "He's made suggestions about how I could lower the interest rate." Margaret sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because we were wrong," Mrs. Foster said simply. "We believed his lies about you because it was easier than believing the truth about him. We're cowards, Mrs. Turner. But you're not. Everyone's talking about how you stood up to him with that axe," Mrs. Chen said with something like admiration. "In the middle of a storm alone with a child, and you still told him no." "He won't forgive that," Mrs. Henderson warned. "He'll make trouble." "He's already made trouble, so," Margaret said tiredly. "Luke Dyer's a good man," Mrs. Foster said. "He'll protect you. I shouldn't need protection just to exist." The women were quiet, acknowledging the truth of it. Emma, who'd been unusually quiet, suddenly piped up. "Would you like cookies? Mrs. Margaret and I made cookies." The tension broke slightly. Over tea and cookies, the women talked carefully, feeling their way toward something that wasn't quite friendship, but might be understanding. They shared stories carefully obliquely about Price's behavior, about the ways women in town protected each other without acknowledging they were doing so. "My husband doesn't know I'm here," Mrs. Henderson admitted. "He thinks I'm visiting my sister." "Mine knows," Mrs. Chen said. "He wanted to come himself, but I told him this was women's business." Before they left, Mrs. Foster pressed a wrapped package into Margaret's hands. "Christmas bread," she said. "My mother's recipe." "I can't." "You can. You stood up to him. That's worth more than bread." After they left, Margaret sat staring at the package, tears rolling down her cheeks. Emma climbed into her lap. "Why are you crying? They were nice." "Sometimes we cry when people are nice because we're not used to it." "That's silly," Emma declared. "I'm nice to you all the time and you don't cry." "That's different." "Why?" "Because you loved me from the start. They had to learn to." Emma considered this. Well, they're slow learners, but at least they figured it out. That night the storm worsened. Margaret had just gotten Emma to sleep when she heard something that wasn't wind horses. Multiple horses and men's voices. Her blood turned to ice. Price had come back and he'd brought help. She grabbed the rifle, checked it was loaded, and positioned herself by the window. In the swirling snow, she could make out 4 figures approaching the house. Her hands shook as she raised the rifle. Then one figure broke from the group running toward the house, and she heard a voice that made her knees weak with relief. "Margaret, it's Luke. Don't shoot." She dropped the rifle and fumbled with the door bar, yanking it open just as Luke reached the porch. He was covered in snow, his face red with cold, but his eyes were wild with something that looked like fear. "Are you all right? Is Emma?" "We're fine," she assured him, then found herself pulled into his arms, crushed against his snow-covered coat. "Harrison sent word to Billings about Price," he said into her hair. "I rode through the night. I'm so sorry I never should have left you alone." "We're fine," she repeated, though she found herself clinging to him, relief making her weak. "Emma tried to defend me with your rifle. She could barely lift it." Luke pulled back to look at her, and she realized the other men ranch hands he'd hired for the cattle drive were watching with interest. "Boys, stable the horses," Luke ordered, without looking away from Margaret. "Then bed down in the bunkhouse." As the men dispersed, Luke cupped Margaret's face in his cold hands. "Tell me exactly what happened." She told him, watching his expression darken with each word. When she got to the part about threatening Price with the axe, something fierce flashed in his eyes. "That's my girl," he murmured, then seemed to catch himself. "I mean, Papa!" Emma came flying down the stairs in her nightgown, launching herself at her father. Luke caught her, holding her tight. "You came back early." "I missed my best girl," he said, but his eyes were on Margaret. "My best girls." The plural hung in the air, acknowledged by all three of them. "The bad man came," Emma informed him seriously, "but Mrs. Margaret was brave, and I was brave, and Mr. Harrison was brave, and we scared him away." "I heard. I'm proud of you both." "Are you going to shoot him?" Emma asked with disturbing casualness. "Emma?" Margaret gasped. "What?" "He's mean. Mean people should get shot." "We don't shoot people for being mean," Luke said firmly. "But if he comes here again, if he tries to hurt either of you—" He didn't finish, but his meaning was clear. That night, after Emma was back in bed, Luke and Margaret sat by the fire. He'd changed out of his wet clothes, and the snow was beginning to let up outside. "I brought you something from Billings," he said suddenly, pulling a small package from his pocket. "Luke, you didn't need to open it." Inside was a silver hair comb, delicate and beautiful, with tiny flowers etched into the metal. "It's too much," Margaret breathed. "It's not enough," he countered. "Not nearly enough for what you've given us." "I'm just doing my job." "Stop." He moved closer, taking her hands. "Stop pretending this is just a job. Stop pretending you don't feel what's happening here." "Luke, I hired you as a housekeeper," he continued, "but somewhere along the way you became more. To Emma. To me." Margaret's heart was racing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when Harrison's message reached me when I thought Price might have hurt you, I nearly went mad. I'm saying that this house feels like a home again with you in it. I'm saying that Emma loves you and I—" He stopped, seeming to gather courage. "I'm falling in love with you too." The words hung between them like suspended snowflakes, beautiful and terrifying. "You don't know me," Margaret whispered. "Not really. You don't know the things I've done to survive. I know you stood up to Price with nothing but an axe and courage. I know you sing to Emma when she has nightmares. I know you've made us both laugh again when I thought we'd forgotten how." He squeezed her hands. "I know enough." "I'm broken," she said, tears starting to fall. "Thomas's death broke something in me that might not ever heal." "Then we'll be broken together," Luke said simply. "Anna's death broke me too. But maybe broken pieces can fit together in new ways. Maybe they can make something different, but still beautiful." Margaret looked at this man who'd appeared in her life like something from a story offering not rescue, but partnership, not pity, but respect. "I'm scared." "Oh, so am I," he admitted. "Terrified, actually. But I'm more scared of losing you. Price won't stop. He'll make our lives miserable." "Let him try." Luke's voice went hard. "I've been patient with him because it was easier, but if he threatens my family again, and make no mistake, Margaret, your family, now I'll end him." "Luke, I mean it. Legal or not, I'll protect what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel safe for the first time since Thomas died. "I don't know how to be a wife again," she whispered. "I'm not asking you to be Anna," he said gently. "Just be Margaret. That's enough. That's more than enough." She looked into his eyes, seeing truth there, seeing a future she'd never dared imagine. Can we take it slow? I need time to—" "All the time you need," he promised. "I'm not going anywhere." From upstairs, Emma's voice called out sleepily, "Papa, Mrs. Margaret, are you getting married?" They both laughed, the tension breaking. "Little pitchers have big ears," Luke called back. "Go to sleep." "But are you—" Luke looked at Margaret, a question in his eyes. She took a breath, then called up, "Maybe someday, sweetheart." "Good. Can we have cake?" "Go to sleep, Emma. Cake is important. Despite everything, Price's threats, the storm, the uncertainty of the future, Margaret found herself laughing. Luke joined her, and soon they were both helpless with it, the stress and fear of the past days dissolving into something lighter. When they finally quieted, Luke stood and offered her his hand. "Walk with me. It's freezing outside." "Just to the porch. I want to show you something." They wrapped in coats and stepped onto the porch. The storm had passed, leaving the world crystalline and perfect under moonlight. Everything was clean and white and new. "Every storm passes," Luke said quietly. "Even the worst ones. And look what they leave behind, a world made new." Margaret understood the metaphor. Her storm with Thomas's death, Luke's with Anna's, the current storm with Price, they would all pass eventually. "It's beautiful," she said. "You're beautiful," he corrected, then kissed her forehead gently. "Now go to bed before you freeze. Tomorrow's a new day." As she lay in bed that night wearing the silver comb in her hair, Margaret thought about new beginnings, about broken pieces making new patterns, about a little girl who called her pretty and a man who made her feel valuable. Price would come for them, she knew. Men like him always did. But for tonight she was safe and warm, and dare she think it loved. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Margaret Turner fell asleep, smiling. The next morning brought unexpected sunshine and Tom Harrison with news. "Price left town," he announced over breakfast, "packed up in the night and headed to Denver." Luke frowned. "That doesn't sound like him." "No, it doesn't," Harrison agreed. "But his house is empty and the bank's in an uproar. Seems he took some money that wasn't his." "He's a thief?" Emma asked with interest. "Appears so," Harrison said. "The sheriff's already wiring Denver. Price won't get far." Margaret felt relief so profound she had to sit down. "He's really gone—" "For now," Luke said, still suspicious. "Men like Price don't give up easily." But for now was enough. For now they could breathe. That afternoon, while Emma napped, Luke found Margaret in the kitchen making bread. "You know what this means," he said. "What? No more excuse to take things slow." His voice was teasing, but his eyes were serious. Margaret's hands stilled in the dough. "Luke, I'm joking," he said quickly, "partially. Margaret, I meant what I said last night, all of it. But I don't want you to feel pressured." She silenced him by pressing a floury hand to his lips. "Ask me again at Christmas." His eyes widened. "Ask you whatever you want to ask me, at Christmas." It was only 5 days away, but it felt like a lifetime. Luke nodded slowly. "Christmas, then." The 5 days until Christmas passed in a blur of preparation and barely contained anticipation. Emma had taken to following Margaret everywhere, asking constantly about wedding cakes and dresses, and whether Margaret would wear the blue ribbon in her hair. Luke, for his part, seemed to be building up to something, starting conversations, only to stop himself reaching for Margaret's hand, only to pull back at the last moment. On Christmas Eve morning, Margaret woke to find a fresh snowfall had transformed the ranch into something from a fairy tale. She dressed carefully in her best dress, the brown wool Thomas had given her, and pinned her hair up with Luke's silver comb. Her hands trembled slightly as she made her way downstairs. The kitchen was already warm, and Luke stood by the stove attempting to make coffee. He turned when he heard her, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "You're up early," she said softly. "Couldn't sleep." He abandoned the coffee pot and moved toward her. "Margaret, I know I said I'd wait until Christmas, but—" "Papa, Mrs. Margaret!" Emma's voice rang out as she thundered down the stairs. It's Christmas Eve. It's practically Christmas. Can we open presents now? Tomorrow, little one, Luke said, though his eyes never left Margaret's face. But I might die of waiting. You've survived this long, Margaret said, forcing herself to act normal. One more day won't kill you. The morning passed with an electric tension. Every time Margaret and Luke were alone, Emma would appear as if summoned. By afternoon, Margaret was ready to lock the child in her room just for 5 minutes of peace. Then just after lunch, horses approached the house. Luke grabbed his rifle but relaxed when he saw Tom Harrison with several other neighbors, including, surprisingly, Mrs. Foster, Mrs. Chen, and Mrs. Henderson with their families. What's all this? Luke asked, stepping onto the porch. Christmas tradition, Harrison said with a grin. We always did a gathering at the Hendersons, but they thought maybe this year we could do it here. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, looking embarrassed. If it's not an imposition, we brought food and presents for Emma. Margaret felt Luke's hand on her back, steady and warm. Of course, she said. Please come in. The house filled with people and laughter. The women took over the kitchen, cooking and gossiping, while the men gathered in the parlor, discussing cattle prices and weather. Children ran everywhere, Emma in the lead, shrieking with delight at having playmates. This is unexpected, Margaret said to Mrs. Foster as they peeled potatoes together. Good unexpected or bad? Good, Margaret admitted. Very good. You've changed things, Mrs. Chen said quietly. Standing up to price like that, it made us all braver. I was terrified, Margaret confessed. But you did it anyway, Mrs. Henderson said. That's what courage is. As the afternoon wore on, Margaret found herself relaxing, laughing, feeling part of a community for the first time since Thomas's death. She caught Luke watching her several times, a soft smile on his face. When evening came and the neighbors began preparing to leave, Mrs. Foster pulled Margaret aside. There's something you should know. My husband heard from the sheriff. They caught Price in Denver. He had nearly $10,000 of other people's money. Margaret gasped. 10,000? He'd been skimming for years, apparently, using his position at the bank to steal from accounts. When you stood up to him when Luke protected you, he knew his time was up. He ran. So he's really gone. He'll be in prison for a long time, Mrs. Foster confirmed. You're safe now. After the neighbors left, the house felt too quiet. Emma had fallen asleep on the sofa, worn out from playing. Luke carried her up to bed while Margaret cleaned the kitchen, her mind whirling with everything that had happened. When Luke returned, he found her standing at the window, watching snow fall in the lamplight. It's almost midnight, he said softly. Almost Christmas. She turned to face him, her heart pounding. Luke? Wait. He pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box. I know this is fast. I know we've only known each other weeks. But Margaret, I've lived more in these weeks than I did in the 2 years since Anna died. You brought us back to life, Emma and me both. He opened the box, revealing a simple gold ring with a small sapphire. It was my grandmother's. She came west with my grandfather when they had nothing but hope and determination. They built a life together from scratch. I'd like to do the same with you. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Luke, let me finish, he said, dropping to one knee. Margaret Turner, you have seen me at my worst, burned food. Muddy boots, a daughter who tells everyone everything. You've been patient with my silences and kind to my child. You stood up to evil with nothing but courage and an axe. You make me laugh. You make me think. You make me want to be better than I am. Will you marry me? Emma's voice piped up from the doorway. Say yes, we already planned the cake. Emma! Luke groaned. You're supposed to be asleep. It's Christmas. Emma ran to them, bouncing with excitement. And you're proposing on Christmas, just like in Mama's stories. Margaret looked between them, this man who offered her love without conditions, this child who had claimed her heart completely. You planned the cake? It has 3 layers, Emma said seriously, and flowers made of sugar. Mrs. Foster is helping. Everyone knows, Margaret asked Luke. I may have mentioned something to Tom Harrison, he admitted. Who told his wife? Who told everyone? So the whole town knows you're proposing to the scandalous widow Turner. The whole town knows I'm proposing to the bravest woman in Montana, Luke corrected. The woman who stood up to Samuel Price. The woman who saved my daughter's spirit. The woman I love. Margaret sank to her knees, bringing herself level with both of them. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Emma shrieked with joy, throwing her arms around both of them. Luke slipped the ring onto Margaret's finger with shaking hands, then cupped her face and kissed her soft, sweet, a promise of things to come. Can we get married tomorrow? Emma asked. It's Christmas. These things take time to plan, Margaret said, though she couldn't stop looking at the ring on her finger. How much time? Luke and Margaret exchanged glances. New Year's Day, he suggested. Start the year fresh. That's only a week away, Joe, Margaret protested. Too long, he teased. She laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. Maybe not long enough. I don't have a dress. Mama's wedding dress is in the attic, Emma said. She told me once that it should be worn again by someone who would love us. Margaret's breath caught. Emma, I couldn't. She would want you to, Luke said softly. Anna was generous like that. She'd be happy knowing you were taking care of us. The next morning, Christmas morning, Margaret woke in her own bed to the sound of Emma's excited voice. It's Christmas, and Mrs. Margaret is going to be my mama. This is the best day ever. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Luke and Emma already by the tree he'd cut down and decorated yesterday. There were presents underneath, not many, but enough. Merry Christmas, Luke said, his eyes warm as they traveled over her face. My fiancé. The word sent shivers through her. Merry Christmas. They opened presents. Emma got a new doll hair ribbons and a picture book. Luke received new gloves and a scarf Margaret had secretly knitted. Margaret opened her gift from Luke to find a leather-bound journal and a set of pens. For your thoughts, he said, or stories for Emma, or whatever you want. It's perfect, she said, running her fingers over the smooth leather. There's more, Emma said, bouncing. Papa has another present. A big one. Luke looked embarrassed. It's not wrapped. It's in the barn. Curious, Margaret followed them outside. In the barn's warmth, in a stall filled with fresh hay, stood a beautiful chestnut mare. She's yours, Luke said. Her name is Belle. Thought you should have your own horse for when we ride to town. As my wife, you'll need independence. Margaret was speechless. A horse was valuable, expensive, a symbol of freedom and status. Luke, this is too much. Nothing is too much for you, he said simply. Besides, Emma picked her out. She has kind eyes, Emma explained. Like you. Margaret ran her hand along Belle's neck, feeling the mare's warm breath on her palm. She's beautiful. Thank you. Both of you. Does this mean you'll teach me to ride better, Emma asked hopefully. Papa says I bounce like a sack of potatoes. We'll learn together, Margaret promised. That afternoon, Reverend Mills arrived looking formal and slightly nervous. I understand congratulations are in order, he said, accepting coffee from Margaret. News travels fast, Luke observed dryly. In a small town, good news travels fastest, the Reverend replied. I wanted to discuss the ceremony. New Year's Day, I heard. If that's acceptable, Margaret said. More than acceptable. It would be my honor. He paused, looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Turner, soon to be Mrs. Dyer, I owe you another apology. My earlier one was insufficient. The way you were treated in my church was abhorrent, and I failed in my duty as a shepherd. I hope you'll allow me to perform this ceremony as a small act of redemption. Margaret studied him, seeing genuine remorse. We all deserve second chances, Reverend. He smiled gratefully. Indeed we do. Now about the ceremony. They spent an hour planning, Emma interjecting constantly with suggestions about flowers and music, and whether Dog, who apparently existed again in her imagination, could be in the wedding party. After the Reverend left, they had Christmas dinner, a feast Margaret had been preparing for days. Roast goose potatoes, carrots, fresh bread, and apple pie that made Emma declare Margaret a cooking angel sent from heaven. That evening, as snow began falling again, they sat by the fire, Luke in his chair, Margaret on the sofa, with Emma curled against her side. It felt so natural, so right, that Margaret could hardly believe it was real. Tell me about when you met Papa, Emma requested sleepily. Margaret smiled, remembering. It was the worst day I'd had in a long time. I was wearing my wedding dress in the snow, and everyone was laughing at me. Then your papa appeared with this little girl who called me pretty. That was me, Emma said proudly. That was you, Margaret agreed, kissing the top of her head. You changed everything with those 2 words. Papa says words have power, Emma murmured, fighting sleep. Your papa is right. Luke met her eyes over Emma's head. Some words more than others, he said quietly. Like, I love you. I love you too. Margaret whispered back, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a whirlwind. Mrs. Foster, Mrs. Chen, and Mrs. Henderson descended on the ranch with determination, bringing fabric ribbons and Anna's wedding dress from the attic. The dress was beautiful ivory silk with delicate lace and pearl buttons. It needed alterations, but Mrs. Chen was a master with a needle. It's like it was meant for you, she said, pinning the hem. Margaret stood before the mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The woman looking back wasn't the broken widow who'd stood in the snow being mocked. This woman looked hopeful, happy, loved. You're crying, Emma observed from where she sat playing with ribbon scraps. Happy tears, Margaret explained. Those are the best kind, Mrs. Henderson said, surprising everyone with her softness. I remember my wedding day. I was terrified and thrilled all at once. That's exactly how I feel, Margaret admitted. Good, Mrs. Foster said. That means it's real. The day before the wedding, Margaret went alone to Thomas's grave. She needed to say goodbye properly, to ask for his blessing in a way. She knelt in the snow, placing fresh evergreen boughs on the simple wooden cross. I'm getting married tomorrow, she told the cold ground. His name is Luke, and he has a little girl named Emma who thinks I hung the moon. They make me laugh, Thomas. They make me want to live again, not just survive. The wind whispered through the bare trees, and she took it as acceptance. I'll never forget you, she continued. You taught me how to love, how to be brave. But I can't live in the past anymore. I hope you understand. As she stood to leave, she noticed them again, those impossible purple flowers blooming despite the snow. She picked one, tucking it into her coat. Tomorrow she would wear it in her bouquet, a small piece of her past carried into her future. That evening, Luke found her in the kitchen, nervous energy making her clean things that were already spotless. Second thoughts? He asked gently. No, she said immediately. Never. Just, it's big. Getting married again, starting over. We're not starting over, he corrected, pulling her into his arms. We're continuing. You'll always have your memories of Thomas. I'll always have mine of Anna. But we're building something new together with all of that as foundation. You're a wise man, Luke Dyer. I'm a lucky man, he corrected. The luckiest in Montana. Papa? Emma called from upstairs. I can't sleep. I'm too excited. They both laughed. Some things won't change, Luke said. She'll still be impossible at bedtime. Good, Margaret said. I don't want everything to change. New Year's Day dawned crystal clear and bitterly cold. Margaret woke early, too nervous to sleep longer. Today she would become Margaret Dyer. Today she would officially become Emma's mother. Today her new life truly began. Mrs. Foster and Mrs. Chen arrived early to help her dress and fix her hair. Emma bounced around them like an excited puppy wearing a new green dress that matched her eyes. You look like a princess, she declared when Margaret was ready. Papa is going to fall over dead. Let's hope not, Margaret said dryly. That would rather ruin the ceremony. The church was packed. It seemed the entire town had come to witness the marriage of Luke Dyer and the woman who'd stood up to Samuel Price. Margaret stood in the vestibule, shaking slightly. Nervous? Tom Harrison asked. He'd agreed to walk her down the aisle, a kindness that had made her cry. Terrified, she admitted. Good. Means it matters. He offered his arm. Ready. She thought of Luke waiting for her, of Emma bouncing beside him as flower girl of the life they would build together. Ready. The doors opened, and she walked into her future. Luke stood at the altar in his best suit, looking handsome and nervous and perfect. When he saw her, his face transformed with such joy that Margaret nearly ran to him. Emma threw flower petals with enthusiasm, occasionally hitting guests in the face. "Sorry, happy flowers," she announced to each victim. When Margaret reached Luke, he took her hands, and she felt the trembling in his fingers that matched her own. "You came," he whispered. "Did you doubt every second until now?" Reverend Mills began the ceremony, his voice carrying through the packed church. Margaret barely heard the words, lost in Luke's eyes in the miracle of this moment. When it came time for vows, Luke spoke clearly. "Margaret, you walked into our lives when we needed you most. You brought light back into our darkness, laughter back into our home. You showed me that love isn't just about holding on to the past, it's about being brave enough to embrace the future. I promise to protect you, to support you, to love you and Emma with everything I have for all the days of my life." Margaret's voice shook as she responded, "Luke, you offered me shelter when the world was cold kindness, when others showed cruelty and love, when I thought I'd never feel it again. You and Emma gave me a reason to hope again. I promise to stand beside you, to be a mother to Emma, to fill your home with warmth and laughter, and probably too many cookies. I promise to love you both with my whole heart forever." "And I promise to eat all the cookies," Emma piped up, making everyone laugh. When Reverend Mills pronounced them husband and wife, Luke kissed Margaret with a tenderness that made her knees weak. The church erupted in applause, and Emma threw her remaining flowers straight up, showering them all with petals. "We're a family now," she announced to everyone. "A real family." The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the barn heated with braziers. The wedding cake, 3 layers, as Emma had promised, stood proudly on display. "Did everyone in town come?" Margaret asked, overwhelmed by the crowd. "Everyone who matters," Luke replied, spinning her in their first dance as husband and wife. "They came to celebrate your courage as much as our marriage." "Our courage," she corrected. "You stood up to Price, too." "We make a good team, Mrs. Dyer." "Yes, Mr. Dyer, we do." As they danced, Margaret saw the life spreading before them, challenges certainly, but faced together. Emma would grow up surrounded by love. Perhaps there would be more children. The ranch would prosper. The town would fully accept her again. But more than that, she saw quiet mornings with coffee and laughter evenings by the fire with Emma's stories. Nights in Luke's arms, learning each other's hearts. She saw a life not perfect but real, not easy, but worthwhile. "What are you thinking?" Luke asked, noticing her distant expression. "That I'm happy," she said simply. "Truly, completely happy." "Good," he said, pulling her closer. "Because you deserve nothing less." Emma appeared beside them, tugging on Luke's jacket. "Can I dance too?" Luke lifted her up, and the 3 of them swayed together, a family complete. Around them, the party continued, neighbors laughing, children playing, the barn warm with celebration. "Mrs. Margaret, I mean Mama," Emma said, testing out the word. "Is this the happily ever after part?" Margaret looked at her new daughter, her new husband, her new life spreading before her like an unwritten book. "No, sweetheart," she said. "This is the happily ever beginning." As if in agreement, snow began to fall outside, soft and clean, covering the world in fresh white. Inside the barn, surrounded by warmth and love and community, Margaret Dyer danced with her family, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The woman who'd stood in a church wearing her dead husband's wedding dress, mocked and alone, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who'd learned that love wasn't just about holding on, it was also about letting go, about being brave enough to reach for happiness again. The music played on, Emma's laughter rang out, and Luke's arms held her steady. This was her life now, not the one she'd planned. Not the one she'd lost, but the one she'd found in the most unexpected place with the most unexpected people. And it was beautiful. The weeks following the wedding settled into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient, as if Margaret had always been meant to wake beside Luke, to braid Emma's hair each morning, to stand at the stove making breakfast while father and daughter debated whether horses could understand human words. The ring on her finger still caught her by surprise, sometimes glinting in the lamplight like a small miracle. It was a Tuesday in late January when everything changed again. Margaret was teaching Emma to write her letters at the kitchen table when they heard horses approaching, many horses moving fast. Luke was in the barn, but Margaret saw him emerge rifle in hand, his body tense with the readiness she'd come to recognize. "Emma, go upstairs," Margaret said quietly. "But, Mama—" "Now, sweetheart." Emma heard the steel in her voice and obeyed, though she lingered at the top of the stairs listening. Margaret moved to the window, her hand finding the pistol Luke had taught her to use, now kept in the kitchen drawer. The riders came into view, 6 men, all armed, led by someone Margaret had hoped never to see again. Samuel Price sat his horse like a king returning from exile, his face gaunt from his time in custody, but his eyes burning with the same cruel light. "How?" she breathed. Luke was already moving toward the house, and she met him at the door. "He was supposed to be in prison," Luke said grimly. "Stay inside. Keep Emma safe." "Luke, I mean it, Margaret." He kissed her quickly, fiercely. "No matter what you hear, stay inside." He stepped onto the porch, rifle casual but ready. "Price, heard you were enjoying Denver's hospitality." Judge was understanding, Price said smoothly. "Seems there wasn't enough evidence to hold me. Witnesses disappeared, documents went missing. Money has a way of solving problems." "What do you want?" "What's mine?" Price's eyes found Margaret in the window. "That woman destroyed my reputation. Because of her, I lost everything." "Because of your own greed," Luke corrected. "You destroyed yourself." "I offered her kindness when she was starving. I offered her work shelter protection. And she repaid me with lies and accusations." Margaret couldn't stay silent. She stepped onto the porch, staying behind Luke, but visible. "You offered me slavery dressed as salvation. There's a difference." Price's face darkened. "You always did have too much pride for a whore." The word had barely left his mouth when Luke's rifle cracked. The shot took Price's hat clean off, sending it spinning into the mud. "The next one won't miss," Luke said calmly. "You call my wife that again, you threaten my family again, and I'll put you in the ground." "You wouldn't dare," Price said, though his voice shook slightly. "There are witnesses. 6 men who rode here to threaten a woman and child." Tom Harrison's voice came from behind the barn. He emerged with 4 other ranchers, all armed. "I don't see any witnesses. I see trespassers." Margaret's heart lifted as she recognized their neighbors' men who'd come for the wedding, who'd danced in their barn, who'd accepted her as Luke's wife without question. "This isn't your business, Harrison," Price snarled. "Man threatens one of us, he threatens all of us," Harrison replied. "That's how it works out here. You'd know that if you were really one of us, instead of just a parasite feeding off our community." Price's men were shifting nervously. They'd expected to intimidate one family, not face half the valley's ranchers. "I've got a proposition," Price said, trying to regain control. "A deal." "No deals," Luke said flatly. "Hear me out. I leave, never come back, and in exchange—" he smiled coldly. "I don't tell everyone what I know about your precious Margaret, about what she did in Denver before she came here." Margaret's blood turned to ice. Denver. He couldn't know about Denver. No one knew about Denver. "Mama," Emma's voice came from the doorway. She'd crept downstairs despite orders. "What's happening?" The sight of the child seemed to inflame Price further. "Perfect. The little girl should hear this too. Should know what kind of woman her father married." "Emma, go inside," Luke ordered. "No, let her stay," Price said viciously. "Let her hear how her new mama spent 3 months in a Denver brothel, how she—" His words were cut off by Margaret's voice, clear and strong. "How I scrubbed floors and washed sheets to earn enough money to bury my husband properly." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Price seemed taken aback. Margaret stepped forward, moving past Luke's protective reach. "Yes, I worked in a brothel. In the laundry 12 hours a day, my hands bleeding from lye soap, sleeping in a closet, because it was the only work I could find that paid enough to ship Thomas's body home. I endured the assumptions, the propositions, the hands that grabbed at me, because I'd promised Thomas he'd be buried beside his parents." She faced Price directly now, her chin raised. "You want to shame me with that. You want to destroy me with the fact that I did honest work in a dishonest place. Go ahead, tell everyone. Tell them how Margaret Turner was so devoted to her dead husband that she debased herself to keep a promise." "Mama's brave," Emma said suddenly, her young voice carrying clearly. She's the bravest person in the whole world. Yes, Luke said quietly, his eyes never leaving Price. She is. Price's face was purple with rage. You think this changes anything? You think... I think you should leave, a new voice interrupted. Reverend Mills rode up, Bible in one hand, pistol in the other. Before I forget my Christian charity entirely. A armed preacher? Price laughed bitterly. How fitting. Even Christ drove out the money changers, Mills replied. And you, Samuel Price, are worse than any money changer. You're a predator who's terrorized this community for years. It ends now. You can't run me off. I own half this town. Owned, Harrison corrected. Banks seized your assets when you ran. Everything you had is being sold to cover what you stole. Price's composure finally cracked entirely. This is her fault. He pointed at Margaret. That bitch ruined everything. Luke moved so fast Price didn't have time to react. One moment he was on his horse, the next he was in the mud, Luke's hands around his throat. I warned you, Luke said, his voice deadly quiet. I warned you what would happen if you called her that again. Price's men reached for their guns, but Harrison and the others already had them covered. Luke, Margaret called, don't. He's not worth it. Listen to your whore, Price wheezed. Luke's fist connected with Price's jaw with a crack that echoed across the yard. Then again, and again. Price tried to fight back, but Luke was younger, stronger, and powered by a rage that had been building since the first time Price had threatened his family. Luke, stop! Margaret ran to him, grabbing his arm. Stop, Emma's watching! That reached him. Luke released Price, who collapsed in the mud, blood streaming from his nose and mouth. Get up, Luke ordered. Get on your horse and ride. If I see you again, if you come within 100 miles of my family, I won't stop next time. Price struggled to his feet, helped by two of his men. His face was already swelling, one eye closing. This isn't over, he mumbled through bloodied lips. Yes, it is, Reverend Mills said. I'll be writing to every church from here to California. Every community will know what you are. There'll be no place for you anywhere decent people live. Price mounted his horse with difficulty, swaying in the saddle. As his men prepared to leave, he looked one last time at Margaret. You could have had everything. I do have everything, she replied. Everything that matters. They watched until Price and his men disappeared over the ridge. Only then did Margaret realize she was shaking. Luke's arms came around her solid and warm. It's over, he murmured into her hair. He won't come back. How can you be sure? Harrison answered. Because if he does, it won't be one man protecting you. It'll be all of us. That's what Price never understood. We take care of our own. The men stayed for coffee and strategy-making plans to ensure Price couldn't return. Messages would be sent to lawmen in surrounding territories. The bank would be notified of his whereabouts. It was a net Price wouldn't escape again. After they left, Margaret found Luke in the barn cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. His knuckles were split and swollen. Let me look at your hands, she said softly. They're fine. Luke. She took the rifle, set it aside, and captured his hands in hers. You defended me. Again. I'll always defend you. I know. She kissed each damaged knuckle gently. But I need to tell you about Denver. All of it. You don't owe me explanations. I owe you truth. She took a breath. After Thomas died, I had no money. The mining company gave me $10 and told me to be grateful. It wasn't enough to bury him, barely enough to eat for a week. I tried to find work, but no one would hire a grieving widow. Then someone mentioned the brothel needed laundry workers. The pay was triple what I'd make anywhere else. Luke listened without interrupting as she told him about those 3 horrible months, the assumptions people made. The men who thought working there meant she was available, the women who worked upstairs and were kind to her despite their own struggles. There was one girl, Mary, barely 16. She gave me extra food when I was too proud to admit I was starving. She died 2 weeks before I left. A customer was too rough. Margaret's voice broke. I used my last wages to bury Thomas and came here hoping to start over. But Price somehow found out. Price is gone, Luke said firmly. And even if he wasn't, even if he told everyone, it wouldn't matter. You did what you had to do to survive and keep a promise. There's no shame in that. Emma heard. Emma heard that her mother is brave and loyal and strong. That's all she needs to know. As if summoned by her name, Emma appeared in the barn doorway. Mama, are you sad? Margaret opened her arms and Emma ran into them. A little sad, sweetheart, but mostly grateful. For what? For you, for your papa, for this life we have. Emma considered this. I'm grateful too, for cookies and horses and that the bad man is gone forever. He might come back, Margaret warned gently. Then Papa will hit him again, Emma said with bloodthirsty satisfaction. Papa hits really hard. Did you see Pow? She mimicked throwing a punch. Emma, Luke said warningly. Violence isn't something to celebrate. But you were protecting Mama. There's a difference between necessary protection and enjoying violence, Luke explained. I didn't hit him because I wanted to. I hit him because he wouldn't stop threatening our family. Emma mulled this over. So, hitting is bad unless someone tries to hurt people you love. Something like that, Luke agreed. It's complicated. Everything grown up is complicated, Emma sighed dramatically. When I grow up, I'm going to make everything simple. That night, after Emma was asleep, Margaret and Luke lay together in their bed, still a novelty that made Margaret's heart race. She traced the bruises on his knuckles in the moonlight. I've never had anyone fight for me before, she admitted. Thomas would have, but he never had to. He died before the world turned cruel. Maybe that was a mercy, Luke said quietly. He never had to see you suffer. But he also never got to see me survive, never got to see me find happiness again. Luke pulled her closer. Do you think he would approve of us? Margaret thought about those purple flowers at Thomas's grave blooming impossibly in the snow. I think he sent you to me, both of you. I think he knew I'd need a reason to keep living. We needed you too, Luke reminded her. Emma was fading before you came, stopping eating, stopping laughing, and I was just going through the motions. And now I wake up eager for each day, to see what Emma will say, what you'll cook, how the light will catch in your hair. He kissed her softly. To build this life with you, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. They made love then slow and tender, a claiming and a promise. Afterward, Margaret lay in Luke's arms, listening to his heartbeat, marveling at the journey that had brought her here. Spring came early that year, melting the snow by late February and bringing green shoots by March. Emma declared it was because Mama made the world happy again, which made Margaret cry and Luke kiss her senseless, while Emma made exaggerated gagging noises. The ranch prospered. Without Price's manipulation of the market, cattle prices improved. Luke hired 2 more hands good men with families who built cabins on the property. Margaret found herself unofficial teacher to their children, conducting lessons in her kitchen, while bread baked and soup simmered. One afternoon in April, she was hanging laundry when nausea struck so suddenly she had to grab the line for support. Emma, playing nearby, noticed immediately. Mama, are you sick? Just a little dizzy, sweetheart. But the dizziness continued, accompanied by other signs Margaret recognized with a mixture of joy and terror. When Doc Wilson confirmed her suspicions in May, she sat in his office stunned. But I couldn't. With Thomas, we tried for years. Sometimes, the doctor said kindly, when we stop trying so hard when we're happy and healthy, nature finds a way. She told Luke that evening after Emma was in bed. He stared at her for so long she began to worry. A baby, he finally whispered. A baby. He crossed the room in 2 strides, lifting her off her feet, spinning her around, until she laughed and protested about the dizziness. A baby, he repeated, wonder in his voice. Our baby. Emma will be thrilled, Margaret said. She's been asking for a sibling. Are you happy? Luke asked, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist. Terrified, she admitted. But yes, happy. So happy I could burst. They told Emma the next morning. Her shriek of joy probably reached town. A baby. A real baby. Will it be a girl? Can I name her? Can she sleep in my room? We don't know if it's a girl, say, Margaret laughed. And babies need their own special bed at first. But I can help, I can teach her things. You'll be the best big sister ever, Luke assured her. Emma proceeded to tell everyone she met about the baby. The mailman, the neighbors, random strangers in town all were informed that Mama's growing a baby and it's going to be the best baby ever, except for me because I was also the best baby ever. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Margaret struggled with the heat as summer arrived. Luke was endlessly attentive, bringing her cool cloths and fresh water, rubbing her swollen feet, talking to her growing belly each night. Papa's being silly, Emma would inform the baby. But he's nice, so we love him anyway. In August, a letter arrived that changed everything. Margaret recognized the handwriting immediately, her sister Charlotte, whom she hadn't heard from since Thomas's funeral. Dear Margaret, it read, I heard through mutual acquaintances that you've remarried. I also heard about your time in Denver about the brothel. I'm writing to tell you that you're dead to me. Mother would be ashamed. Don't ever contact me again. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in her hands. She'd thought she was past being hurt by others' judgment, but her own sister. Luke found her there an hour later, still staring at the cruel words. Sweetheart, what's wrong? He read the letter, his face darkening. How did she even know about Denver? Price, Margaret said dully. He must have written to her before he left. One last act of cruelty. Luke crumpled the letter and threw it in the stove. Your sister is a fool. She's my only family. No, Luke said firmly, kneeling beside her chair. We're your family, Emma and me and this little one. The neighbors who stood with us against Price. That's your family. Blood family. Blood doesn't make family. Love does. Choice does. He placed his hand on her belly. This child will grow up knowing that family is about who shows up, who stays, who fights for you, not about shared blood. Emma, who'd been napping, appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Why is Mama crying? Someone said something mean to her, Luke explained. Emma's face set in determination. She marched over and wrapped her arms around Margaret's neck. They're wrong. Mama is the best person in the whole world. She makes the best cookies and tells the best stories and gives the best hugs. Whoever was mean is just jealous because they don't have a mama like mine. Margaret pulled Emma into her lap, or what was left of it, with her belly so large. How did I get so lucky to have you? It wasn't luck, Emma said seriously. It was love. Love brought us together. Right, Papa? Right, little one? That night, unable to sleep from the baby's kicking and the August heat, Margaret stood on the porch watching the stars. The night was alive with cricket songs and the distant howl of coyotes. Luke joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands spread over her belly. Can't sleep. Your child is doing acrobatics. Already taking after Emma, he said with a smile in his voice. They stood in comfortable silence until Margaret spoke. I never thought I'd have this. A family, a home, a future. After Thomas died, I thought my life was over. It was just beginning, Luke said. You just couldn't see it yet. I was so broken. We all were, but we healed each other. He turned her to face him. Margaret, I need you to know something. If Price comes back, if your sister shows up, if anyone tries to hurt you or shame you, I will stand between you and the world. Always. I know. But more than that, I need you to know that you don't need me to stand for you. You're the strongest person I know. You stood up to Price with an axe in a snowstorm. You survived Denver. You brought Emma back to life. You're growing our child while teaching half the Valley's children their letters. You don't need saving Margaret. You never did. She kissed him, then pouring all her love and gratitude into it. When they pulled apart, both were breathless. I love you, she said simply. And I love you, every scarred, beautiful, brave piece of you. The baby came on a September morning with the aspens turning gold outside the bedroom window. The labor was long but uncomplicated with Doc Wilson attending, and Emma banned to the kitchen despite her protests. I want to help, she wailed. You can help by making tea, Luke told her, though he looked ready to faint himself. When the baby's cry finally rang out, Emma came thundering up the stairs, bursting through the door, just as Doc Wilson announced, It's a boy. A boy. Emma's face fell slightly. But I wanted a sister. Boys can be fun too, Margaret said weakly, cradling the squalling infant. Emma approached cautiously, peering at the red, wrinkled face. He's not very pretty. You weren't either at first, Luke said, his voice rough with emotion as he stared at his son. Was too... You looked like an angry potato. Papa, Emma protested, but she was smiling. Can I hold him? They positioned Emma carefully in a chair, and Margaret placed the baby in her arms. Emma's face transformed with wonder. He's so small. Was I this small? Smaller, Luke said. What's his name? Margaret. And Luke exchanged glances. They discussed this. Thomas? Margaret said. Thomas Luke Dyer. After your first husband, Emma asked with the startling perception children sometimes displayed, is that okay with you? Emma considered. Will you tell him stories about the first Thomas? Yes. Then it's good. Everyone should know where they come from. She looked down at the baby. Hi, Thomas. I'm Emma. I'm your big sister. I'm going to teach you everything like how to ride horses and make mud pies and which berries are poisonous. Maybe skip the poisonous berries lesson, Luke suggested. Life with a new baby was exhausting but joyful. Emma was a devoted sister singing to Thomas when he cried, helping with baths, only occasionally suggesting they trade him for a pony. The community embraced the new addition. Mrs. Foster brought meals, Mrs. Chen made baby clothes, and even Mrs. Henderson knitted blankets. Tom Harrison carved a beautiful cradle, and Reverend Mills baptized Thomas on a crystalline October day with half the town in attendance. Margaret stood in this church, where she'd once been mocked, holding her son, while her daughter clutched her skirt and her husband's arm circled her waist. The same people who'd laughed at her now smiled with genuine warmth. Funny how things change, she murmured to Luke. You changed them, he replied. Your courage changed everything. That evening, as the first snow of winter began to fall, Margaret sat in her rocking chair nursing Thomas while Emma played at her feet, and Luke read aloud from one of Anna's books. The fire crackled. The baby made soft sounds, and Emma occasionally interrupted with questions or observations. This was happiness, Margaret realized, not the dramatic, desperate happiness she'd thought she needed, but this quiet, everyday joy. This accumulation of small moments, Emma's laughter, Luke's steady presence, Thomas's tiny fingers wrapped around hers. She thought of that day nearly a year ago when she'd stood in the snow in a wedding dress, broken and alone. If someone had told her then that she'd be here now, married again, mother to 2 children respected in the community, she would have thought them mad. But life had a way of surprising you, of leading you through darkness to light you couldn't have imagined. Sometimes salvation came not as a dramatic rescue, but as a quiet offer of work. Sometimes love arrived not with fanfare, but with a child's simple words, "She is pretty, Daddy." "Mama," Emma said, breaking into her thoughts. "Tell us a story." "What kind of story?" "A true one, about someone brave." Margaret looked at her family, her chosen, fought-for, beloved family. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a woman who thought her life was over, but then she met a little girl who called her pretty, and everything changed." As she told their story, edited for young ears, snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in fresh white. But inside there was warmth and light and love, so much love it seemed to fill every corner of the house. This was her happily ever after, Margaret realized. Not because it was perfect or easy, but because it was real, because it had been earned through courage and pain and the choice to keep going when everything seemed lost. The woman who'd been laughed out of church was gone. In her place sat Margaret Dyer, wife, mother, survivor, thriver. She'd been broken and remade, lost and found, destroyed and rebuilt. And she was beautiful.